Es sparkling water, ¿eh?
La recibido como
Pones
decir,
tu
pero
tarjeta y te damos.
La del banco es...
Y te saca el dinero. Ostras, pero si también nosotros...
I think I'm just searching my hammer.
You have hammer?
No, it's not. Okay, so could we start? Good morning. Welcome to our plenary session today. I'm very happy to have you here. Some of you I have met also at other locations of the School of Democracy. For us as a political group, this is very important, and I think a very good investment we made, because it's important to be connected with the next generation. In that sense, I think we had the last 5 years very interesting experiences. It's a great pleasure to be with you. My name is Josef Weidenholzer. I'm member of the LIBE committee, a committee on civil liberties, justice and home affairs. I'm member of also of the bureau of the group, vice president of the group, and I'm elected in Austria, a place where the question of democracy, I think, is also at stake, and on the middle between Eastern and Western Europe. I was active in my group regarding the Article 7 procedure against Hungary and the rule of law task force. And over the years I'm a member of the parliament, I have actually experienced the deterioration of democracy when it started 2010 with Viktor Orban, and I was part of all the work in my committee, and it really changed over the course of the last years. It really is a new quality of illiberalism in Europe now. So it is very important to be aware, and our group, I think, played an active role, and we are also quite clear that we also speak out if it comes to countries where we are in the government, because democracy is a universal question and not just a question of party politics. So we are very happy to conclude this with this meeting, and we are honored to have two special guests with us. One is Agnes Heller, the great lady from Hungary. Agnes was also contributing to our activities in the Together. We are very happy to have you here. You are, I would say, a voice over the decades. Yeah? You are someone who experienced everything what happened in Europe, starting with the Shoah, starting with communism. You had been an important voice over the dark years in Eastern Europe, respected by everybody. And when you came to an age where other people are just trying to retire and to be a little bit more silent, she had to speak out and had to become loud again in the context of Hungary. So we are very happy and very honored to have you here. Thank you very much for coming. And we are also very honored that Jan Zielonka is being with us. He was working with the group on different issues. And I think we learned a lot. We discussed a lot of common ideas and projects. Jan has taught in Poland, the Netherlands, Italy, and he's now in the UK at Oxford University. UK is still a member of our union. So we'll hope that we could keep that. And he was very much involved in the process of democratization of Poland. And long before Brexit, he also predicted the disintegration of the current European order. And recently, you published a very influential bestseller on the future of liberal democracy, Counter-Revolution, which has been a success and is still a source of discussion. We would now start in the following order, that I will first ask you, Jan, to start with your contribution, and then we will have Agnes for the second part. So the floor is yours. If you could confine to around 10 minutes, would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be back here with this group. You make me hope that the course of progressive politics is not lost yet. So keep it going. You see, let me start with something what I strongly believed in, that a liberal democracy is a contradiction in terms. There cannot be democracy without constitutional frames, without division of power, without protections of minorities, free media, and free association. There's no democracy of any name which doesn't guarantee this. But we are living in times that these liberal notions of democracy is being questioned in the entire Europe. And I want to emphasize this. It is not just in countries Agnes and I were born, in entire Europe. As it happened, you know, I work in Britain, I live part-time in Italy, and I'm still following closer Dutch politics, where you know who has won yesterday elections to the Senate, yeah? With which kind of program and rhetoric. And I call it the anti-liberal counter-revolution. But illiberalism, and it's very important to understand, has many variations, and it has long history. I mean, Le Pen, father, got to the French parliament in the 50s. And then you remember Jörg Haider in your country, or Pim Fortuyn. I knew Film Pothouw. He was my colleague at the University of Amsterdam before he entered to politics. So what I want to say, and I'm not going to steal the topic from Agnes, is that Viktor Orban didn't invent populism. He, in a way, doesn't shape it either. He gets too much attention he deserves. He is a little autocrat in a small country. The future of liberal and illiberal politics will be decided somewhere else, most probably in France, Germany, Italy, and who knows, maybe even in Great Britain. This doesn't say that Marine Le Pen, Boris Johnson, or Matteo Salvini are impressive politicians. They are not. Populists are strong because we are so weak at present. That's the point. And by liberals, I mean all those center-right and center-left parties which run Europe for the last 3 or more decades. So I don't mean only liberal parties which call themselves liberal. And these include children of Blair, Schroeder, Koch, or D'Alema. You know what kind of family I mean. Because democratic erosion took place on their watch. On their watch. Populists were not in power. They came to power recently. And why they came to power? Because people who voted left and right-wing liberals said we had enough. This is why it happened. Populism was only concerned, but it is concerned so tremendous because we lost trust of the voters. And as I said to you at the beginning, democracy is not just about elections. But you cannot have democracy without elections either. So you need to get this public support. And the failures are many. I don't want to repeat them. But you see, when I would say this is a public meeting, not in a family of progressive politics, they will immediately tell me, oh, don't give ammunition to our enemies. But here we have to be honest with ourselves, because we have to understand why we lost those voters. And social democrats, I'm not talking even about Christian Democrats, they embrace neoliberal economics which eroded public authority through privatizations and deregulation. And markets felt no longer constrained by democracy. In fact, democracy have become hostage of markets because each time you wanted to increase social policy, you know, the markets would tell, oh, we will take our toys to Vietnam. And you know all the stories about inequalities and about the crisis of social policies. And in democratic times also, more and more decisions have been shifted to non-elected bodies. Let's face it. Central banks, constitutional courts, regulatory agencies. You know, even the European Commission got more and more powers. But people increasingly started to feel that this commission listened more to these 30,000 lobbies in the city than to ordinary citizens. You know, I know some of those lobbies. I can tell you, they are pretty rich people. Yeah? So, somebody makes business here. And Carter parties emerged. Parliaments became dysfunctional. Look at the mother of parliaments, Westminster, today, how they are able to function. And as a result, people felt that they are being ignored. They may have voice, but they may have vote, but not voice. And they said, you know, we can change the government, but we cannot change policies. And this has been, in my view, the prime motive of, you know, of the rise of populism. They just benefited on this. They just walked through the window of opportunity. They took advantage of the situation. And what will happen? I don't know. How to make democracy thrive? We will discuss today. But I think first, Social Democrats need to understand what went wrong. They need to get rid of politicians who screw it in the first place. They need to elect new leaders from the new generations of social activists, of grassroots activists. Because recycling will not do. Recycling will not do. It's a different ballgame. And if this is the case, we have to think how to reinvent democracy, our style. What is our vision of public participation, of, you know, and here it is not just, you know, it is very important to understand this is not about one or two institutional solutions. And certainly this is not about a decree being issued. This is, you know, it is not even what Macron suggested, listening to the people. It is about empowering the people. It is about giving them back sovereignty, because in democracy, people are sovereign. It was under, you know, a pre-democratic era that the king organized, if he was enlightened, organized meetings with the people to listen. But this is what President Macron proposed recently. I will organize consultations. Thank you very much. You know, it is not what is going to fly. And we need to also understand that in transnational Europe, where communication markets are all transnational, we need public authority which is at the same level as those transactions are, on the same level where this communication is. But the irony of history, and here I finish, is that the only transnational institutions with some forms of democracy, the EU, is really, going to be taken over in these elections by combinations of soft and hard populists. You know, and I already see the rhetoric which is emerging from this. And this scenario can only be avoided if young people are mobilized to vote, because they have more stakes in an open, just, and environmentally friendly Europe. You have more stakes. But sadly, a lot of young people, and this is not what you probably think, but they don't feel part of the European project, because Erasmus enhances connectivity, but it doesn't empower young people. And ACTA 1 and 2 suggest that the EU is going into opposite direction. It disempowers the new generation and empowers the big business. And if you want to win the battle with a progressive message, you have to come out with something serious here.
Thank you very much, Jan. Now the floor is with Agnes.
This is not an academic discussion. It is about your future. The discussion is conducted. We are before a crisis of Europe, which is not identical with the crisis of the Union, but it has to do also with the crisis of the Union. who emerged now in Europe? Which kind of powers emerged? Ethnic nationalism arrived in Europe and became more and more forceful. You spoke about it, you spoke about populism. I don't think that populism is the correct expression for it, I am sorry. Because I think populists were like Chavez or like Perón, they supported also the poor people, peasants, workers, etc. Ethnic nationalism does the opposite. Ethnic nationalism supports the rich against the poor. In a country of ethnic nationalism, I give examples, for example, now, Hungary, the rich become richer and the poor become poorer each and every day. That's nothing populism in it. Demagoguery is not necessarily populist. The nationalist demagogueries which are based on identity politics. Now, I agree with you that Marine Le Pen is an old, and Le Pen, the whole Le Pen movement is old. But today we are confronted with the new phenomenon, with the phenomenon in which ethnic nationalists become more and more forceful and traditional parties lose momentum. I don't think that it is only because the mistakes they committed. I think the situation, the world has changed. The society has changed, and the greatest problem is they haven't faced the change of the world. They simply continue to do the old things which did not work anymore. What kind of change I speak about? I think that class societies became mass societies. In class societies, the social classes, political parties express the interest of the social classes. Democrazia Cristiana, like Italian, defended the rich and the elegant people and the well-to-do. Communist Party defended the poor workers. Socialists, liberal socialists, basically middle class, lower middle class, the classes were voting. Basically, it was a very stable work order. Whether you liked them or I did not like them, it was a kind of liberal democracy. People could go to the street, say it is wrong, everything that we do is wrong, something else would be better, because this is the issue at liberal democracy, that you can always say no, because in an ethnic nationalist countries, you cannot really say no without meeting sanctions. That's very, very important distinction. So in mass societies, we live in mass societies. You cannot address classes anymore because no class interest. The workers are not class. The poor people are not a class. Marx was right. There is no class without class consciousness. Is there class consciousness nowadays? We do not have this kind of thing. There are people listening no more to interest. They have no common interest. They listen to ideology. And ethnic national provides the ideology. They provide the simplest ideology, the ideology of national identity. That is, we are the best, we are the greatest, we defend you from the other. We defend you from the migrants, first of all from the migrants. We are the ones who defend you from the migrants. We defend you against Brussels. We are different. We are the best in the world. And I, and this also Tyrant says it, I defend you from the other. That is, the other is the devil, and we are the angels, and they demonize the other, that the migrants are demonized by ethnic nationalists, and the demonization is not against the migrants. Or now Orban demonized also the European Union, that also a demon which does not allow the sovereignty of different nations to develop. The idea of sovereignty is basically ridiculous, because the part of sovereignty is given up already when you are a member of the Union. For example, you cannot declare war if you want to. But if you want to return whole sovereignty, you will have the right to wage war against each other as well, even within the Union. I speak about the next elections. Ethnic nationalists can gain, I would not say the majority, but a very huge minority, and they can influence the decisions of the European Parliament. But still, until they do not take the whole European Parliament in their hand, ethno-nationalists will always look at Brussels, that Brussels is the other. But what happens if they take over the Union? They need an enemy. What happens if there were no migration? They need an enemy. Oh, it is simple. They will hate each other because ethnic nationalists need to have an identity. If there is no not Brussels is the enemy, not the migrants enemy, our neighbors will be the enemy. So I can predict. It's not a very difficult prediction. If ethnic nationalists gain the power, the main power in the European Union, the Union will fall apart, and European wars will begin again. We are in the same, very similar situation to 1914. In 1914, there was three generations that did not know wars, 100 years of peace. Now you did not know war yourself, and your parents did not know, perhaps even your grandparents did not. You have no idea what a war is about. So in this kind of situation, ideology are very forceful. Ideology, nationalist ideology, first and foremost, is very forceful. Can persuade you to be only yourself, not ally yourself with any other country, any other European country, because it's always dangerous to keep your own identity. So that was in 1914 as well. Very few people knew what will follow, because they cannot foresee what will follow. If you shut your eyes, you can shut your eyes, you can say something will develop, it is not so serious, who knows, they are not so bad people. They do not need to be bad people. There is a logic of certain tendencies in Europe, not only Europe, everywhere. There is a political tendency and ideology which has a logic, and the logic develops if we do not stop it. So we have to stop it. And this is what I suggest you for your not personal interest, but the interest of Europe. You are part of the people who can stop this. How to stop it? This is a question you have to answer, because I'm a philosopher. I cannot answer the question how to stop it. A Hungarian citizen, I can know how to stop it in Hungary, but I cannot tell you how to stop it in Italy. When Salvini will do the same as Orban is doing, he will win the next elections, obviously, and if the alternative for Deutschland, after will gain far more power. You never know. And Marine Le Pen in France, you gave all these examples. So if they get a greater power, people will not know the dangers because they have very little historical sense. So what I would ask you to do is to understand, because you cannot really devise a kind of counter-poison against poison without understanding the world, without understanding what is at stake and how the world looks like. Because without knowing how the world looks like, you cannot invent a counter-ideology, because you cannot gain over ethnic-nationalist ideology only with referring to economic interest. It will not be useful. It will not be successful. You have to invent another ideology, a liberal democratic ideology, in which I agree with you, is basically what we understand under democracy. But of course you must know, and with this I finish, although we understand liberal democracy, that is democracy, there are other concepts of democracy. The other concept comes from a tradition. It means that if a government is voted by a majority, this is democracy. So then Putin is democracy, Erdogan is democracy, Orban is democracy, even Sisi from Egypt is a democracy, even Iran is a democracy, because elections all these places, and the majority elects a tyrant, I repeat, a tyrant, every 4 years, and re-elects a tyrant, and re-elects a tyrant, and they say, okay, we are a democracy because our authority is based on popular will. But the popular will is not simple. The popular will is changing. The popular can be so as a sunflower. You know sunflowers? Sunflowers turn towards the sun. Who is the sun in politics? Power is the politics. The sunflower turn to the power. You don't idealize. I don't idealize people. You cannot idealize people. You have to know that the turn towards sunflowers turn towards power. That is, you have to show power, not a real power, power of the word, power of conception, power of solidarity, and power of understanding. If you have this power, then the sunflower will turn towards you. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. Thank you very much. Now the next part of our session is that we hear the rapporteurs from the 5 working groups. The first working group is Democracy at Work, and I ask Alisa Trojanki for her report. Thanks. You can come here, yeah? Fine.
That's good. That's good.
It's not working. Sorry. Maybe it works.
No, that's good.
Just push the button, right?
Yeah, thank you very much. I was in a group, Democracy at Work, and we touched upon so many topics that it's really hard to summarize. But we wanted to just say that we think that social dialogue is a really substantial part of democracy, actually, and also limiting inequality within a society. We also discussed about democracy in companies as such, like in very practical terms. But the question we really want to talk about is whether democracy at work is endangered by illiberal democracies. What does democracy mean in times where the economy is really changing, where gig economy and platform work is really gaining momentum? And also, we talked about the Brexit and the fact that workers there actually chose to actively vote against the EU, and in this way kind of hurt their own interests, but we were not really sure about the consequences, in the sense whether we need better communications about what the EU does for workers' rights, or whether the EU should actually even stronger set minimum standards and really work for workers in that sense.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Emmanuel de Cordin from Working Group 2, The Rise of Illiberal Democracy. Where are you? Okay. Thank you.
So I'll do my best to summarize what we talked about in the 3 different groups that split off after the panel discussion. To phrase it in the forms of provocative questions that we should reflect upon. Should the EU and EU countries be tolerant of parties and individuals and political movements that expressly claim not to be tolerant of democracy? And where do we set that line when we look at countries like Poland and Hungary that are effectively undemocratic but still claim to be democratic? And the second question is, when we see countries such as Hungary and Poland and Italy and some others that are starting to restrict the freedom of women to determine their lives and their economic paths, and reduce the equality of women within government and the society, how do we combat that? And what do we need to do in our own societies to make sure that we're living up to our own mission, to our own task, and that we're doing the work that we need to do to make women and racial and ethnic minorities and sexual minorities equal partners in our society, and that our institutions are built upon that partnership rather than these partnerships being sprinkled on top and then removed when convenient.
Adriana Coțanu from Romania on learning democracy locally. And I also want to welcome participants from the Committee of Regions, activists, local activists in various parts of Europe.
Hello, everyone. So our topic was learning democracy locally. So we split in 3 discussion groups. One group discussed more on how to run an European agenda at the local level. The second group discussed the importance of engaging young people in politics. And the third one discussed more about the concept I vote where I live, about citizenships and rights to vote. So all the 3 had somehow in common the idea of that we should rebrand politics to make it more accessible for young people. Accessible first, like language-wise. We talked a lot about that politics many times is framed in such words that don't mean anything or to young people or don't understand them properly. So when you say sustainable economy, what you really mean, or public policy, what you really mean. So showing how those words look in real life, and otherwise to make it accessible location-wise. So many times activities are based just in London, just in Budapest, just in Bucharest, to go with events and gatherings in such areas where politics don't really go or events don't really go, like in disadvantaged areas, for example, in villages, small cities, forgotten neighborhoods. So this would be one way to tackle the involvement of young people in politics. And then we discussed much about good practices. So, okay, we asked all these questions, but how we really do the thing. So we had examples like Mayor for one day, from an example from Italy, where once a month somebody's coming in the office and is following the mayor of the city the entire day for 8 hours. Another good practice would be gamification of education, like digitalizing everything we're discussing here, make it more like accessible for young people. So, for example, using platforms that they are already knowing. For example, the concept of Minecraft, giving badges or something for them because they attended an event. Another example was from UK cafes, to gather people for local cafes like we had last night. And beside every good practice, we emphasized really hard in the discussions that politics first has to be credible. So if you are not credible and you are not tackling relevant issues and real needs of the young people will not be active, because you have to show that you are credible and you are really tackling their issues, and you are then following up, so showing what you did for them. So this is mostly what we discussed.
Thank you, Adriana. The next working group is Progressive Alliances in Society, and I ask Amis Abu-Jakov from the United Kingdom.
You can also speak, okay.
Yeah, as you like, you can also speak from here, but I think it's better if you see your yeah.
Hello, everybody. This is going to be short and sweet. So our workshop was about progressive alliances in society. We discussed a wide range of topics. I'm not going to go through all of them, but they included a couple of key points. One of them was that there has become a general decline in the membership of not only political parties, but trade unions. And those people have moved from that sphere to civil society organizations. So people have decided to opt out of the traditional political model of activism and gone for civil society engagement. Following on from that, there has become, over time, a blurred line between civil society groups, the work that they do, and the work that governments do. You see charities delivering services like homeless shelters that governments provided in the past, just as an example. And that's blurred over time, and there are questions about how sustainable that is. And of course, a lot of the current alliances and political models are from the 20th century, but we haven't really looked at a 21st century model that can be used effectively today in Europe. And comparing the 20th century to the 21st century is like comparing a musket to a machine gun. It's not really that easy to compare. We also touched on the work of Solidar, the civil society organization across Europe, and the fantastic work that they do. So from all of this, we came up with a two-part question for our panelists and everybody here to answer. The first part: how integral should civil society groups be in delivering social democracy in the 21st century? I'll let that hang. And the second part is, individually and collectively, what is your vision of progressive social democracy in the 21st century? Thank you.
Thank you. Now we come to the fifth working group, Anglia Courginou, e-democracy and e-activism.
Yes, so thank you first for having us all here and listening to us as well. So we were in this fifth workshop, we talked about e-democracy and e-activism, which, comparing to other subjects and other debates about a liberal democracy, is a bit less green, maybe. We're talking about ways that we can, through activism, ways we can fight illiberalism and populism. But first, let me just summarize some of the few key points of what was debated. We had two panelists, so Mr. Luis Arroyo and Tim Allen. And the key points really were that real change in society takes time, and the media does not always catch up fast. And one of the examples was the civil rights movement in the US in the 60s. We can almost say there's still a lot of time, it's still ongoing actually. But the second point is, and that's according to the panelists, which I think most of us did not expect actually going to that workshop, is that e-activism is often not effective enough. It does not compel governments to act, and the governments, they really rather respond to massive physical mobilization from their citizens. So we had a few questions, of course, arising from that. But the underlying is also that the social media is great for campaigns, but is also great for populists, and we see it every day. And of course, I don't want to mention the orange man in the US, but you all know him, I'm sure. So really the question is, how can we win the fight? And we had a very good sort of manual that I think we can use and take back home with us, thanks to Mr. Arroyo, and with 7 points. So it's important to have a clear message, to be specific, so to be clear about what we stand for, who do we oppose. It's also important to not be too rational and get into too long and complicated ideas, because we'll lose everyone if we just do that. Although I like sometimes to be a bit rational. It is also important to not allow for any lie to survive, and that comes with the fourth point, is that we also need to be on top of fact-checking. And I think it's also important to emphasize our identity and to call for more fights. So these were the 7 points that we saw throughout the workshop. And so the underlying thing that came up from all those discussions is that even though we as this group and the Socialists and Democrats, we appeal to a large and diverse electorate, we have one identity. We are progressives, and we can all agree on most of the points within this progressive alliance. And so the question that comes from that is, Should we rather run or campaign against our enemies, or run for a vision, for something that we believe in? How can we effectively spread our message? And that was what came up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now come to our two panelists, and then we give the floor to you. So, Jan, your comments?
Look, two issues struck me here. The first is, who are the enemies of democracy, as we understand it? And second, how to arrive at democracy we want. The first thing is that while I agree with Agnes entirely that ethnic nationalism is a threat to democracy, I don't think it is the only threat to democracy, and maybe not even the key threat to democracy. But of course, very much depends on local circumstances. In Hungary, it certainly is. But even if I go to Italy, ethnic nationalism applied to Cinque Stelle would be very difficult. And even Salvini, who claims Italy for Italians, you know, it doesn't talk the language of Orban on this, of ethnic nationalism. And if I hear, for instance, yesterday Thierry Baudet in his victory speech in Holland, most of this was directed against environmental policies. If I hear to Mr. Kaczynski of last week, it was not ethnic nationalism, the enemy was genderism and LGBT rights and so on. So I think we have to understand that this is not just about one thing, that there are various versions of illiberal democracy being proposed here. But how, okay, you know, okay, you know what represents the threat, but what to do with this? And I remember when in Poland, in Solidarity movement, we were struggling against communist dictatorship, we had a slogan: let's not burn the Central Party Committee, let's create our own new. You know, so in other words, we shouldn't just get obsessed with those who pervert the notion of democracy and oppress people. We should create an alternative versions of this. And what is the liberal alternative version? A particularly progressive liberal alternative version. First of all, if you want to be progressive, you cannot say, we want the old to come back. But in Britain, Blairites are exactly saying this, you know, and in Poland I see the leading party too. Good times have to come back, you know, it was so good and this populists came to power, we have to, you know. So if you are progressive, you cannot be conservative. You have to decide, point one, yeah? Point two, you know, you have to understand that liberal means that there is no chasing utopia. I know that without having a vision, it's very difficult to know where you go to, because you need to have some sense. But you know, if you are liberal, you understand politics not as a struggle against your enemies and winning the struggle, as the Russian says, kto kogo, you know, who prevails over whom. Democracy is about bargaining. It's about conflicting ideas. So the process is as important as the product, because take environmental issues. On all environmental measures taken, there will be winners and there will be losers. And you cannot avoid that. The same if you know, because environmental politics, you know, and one of the reasons, for instance, why certain measures against diesel cars are not being introduced is not only because the elite support big business like Volkswagen. It is also because the poor people will have to be, you know, affected by environmental measures in the first place. So unless you create a system in which they are somehow compensated or get incentives to move to more expensive environmental friendly technology, then there will be a problem. I just gave you one example here to show you that you need to have environmental ambitions and goals, but there is no one way of arriving there. So you need to bargain and you need to experiment. And this is what the essence of progress in liberal politics is. So you get out of the bunker, you start to build your own vision, but this vision, you have to talk to the electorate to convince them to your policies. And when those policies fail for one reason or another, you just try to rethink it and try again. There is no other way of doing this if you want to be a liberal. Because if you want to be liberal, you go short way, you introduce 1 and 2 decrees, and those who disagree with you are enemies of the people. Thank you very much. This is not what I mean by democracy.
You? Agnes.
I try to answer to the questions which were raised by you, but first I tell you something. Yeah, Kaczynski is an ethnic nationalist. Ethnic nationalists are all extreme rightists. And extreme rightists are obviously all against feminism, all against women's rights, all they want to in a way defend the kind of values which are values for the extreme right. That's no contradiction here. That is against women, Kaczynski against women. Of course, all ethnic nationalism. Orban is also, and all the others are, again. That is not, I don't think, like a counter-argument. Now, let me go to the questions. The first and another question was about redistribution. About what my view is about redistribution, what kind of redistributions are at stake in a social democratic policy. I think this was two people ask very similar questions. Now, look, market. Without market, modern society cannot survive. Without market, there is mass starvation, and I would not even say even worse. But market produces inequality. Market, we need, produces inequality. And something with this inequality needs to be done. We have to tackle the issue of inequality. It is normally tackled with redistribution. The state redistributes the profit. How do you redistribute the profit? There was a welfare state model. I think in this respect still a good model, that you redistribute the money to the profit to the poor and not to the wealthy. There are different kinds of means to do that. There is another way of redistribution. I'm sorry to say ethnic nationalists and illiberal Democrats have this way of support this way of their redistribution. This is redistribution for the wealthy against the poor, increase and increase inequality. So I give only Hungary's example, but I could give other ones. Orban created its own oligarchy. That is, the oligarchy is created by the political. And you speak about a different kind of corruption. When you mean corruption, you mean a businessman corrupts a politician. That's totally different. The political, illiberal democracy creates its own oligarchy. And this oligarchy's task is, they're very extremely rich. This oligarchy's task is to support this government. They create their own economic basis, whereas the poor people get nothing, even taken away what they have. This is even taken away what they have. Poor people have absolutely nothing. That is, the system is all increasing. I speak in this case refeudalization of modern society in all countries, not in Hungary, where there is a reverse redistribution. It is the case of the refeudalization of modern society, as the king gave his supporters land, wealth, etc., so do the modern tyrants give their supporters economic might, land, money, factory, and the European Union, the money from the European Union went, at least 30% of this went to this kind of oligarchy. So this also redistribution. Obviously, the socialist project needs a redistribution of the old kind plus something, because technology changed things. I think one of the most important things, that was the question of one of you in a social democratic politics, is to put an end to the inheritance of poverty, because poverty is now inherited, became inherited. There is no upwards mobility. To increase upwards mobility, which is this education, because you cannot have upwards mobility now without education. That is the organization of education which makes possible upwards mobility, that the child of the poor man should not be poor anymore. So this, the possibility, the equal opportunity, just a slogan, just in the moon. You have to provide really equal opportunity, not only in words but in practice, for people in a country where there is a social democracy in a way or in another. The other question was the trade union question, which was raised. I think the who raised it was very much right. The trade unions, that has nothing to do with so-called class consciousness. Trade unions interest the people who work there. In Hungary, they passed a so-called slave law. Perhaps you know about it. Against the slave law, everyone demonstrated. All parties, right and left, middle, everyone demonstrated, because the slave law touched basically is something which is relevant for everyone in this country, in Hungary, in the country, everyone relevant, that the slave law should be abolished, should not be kept. It was not abolished, but in certain factors they said they won't apply, we won't apply, this law we won't apply. So this is again a very important point you have made. There are other important points, someone that maybe you last one of you spoke about, as the role of civil society. And many people among you too, about the democratization of the population, as well democracy is not just representative democracy, are the local elections. In local elections, namely, people know the people whom they elect. In a village, they know them. In a small they know the people. Now, there is a new, I would not say party, but movement in Hungary. The name of this party is Hungary for Everyone. And they have the project that next local elections, they will support against Fidesz one person who is the most popular, and has a progressive view, most popular in the local community. If he has a progressive view and very popular in this community, should not be a member of the party, should not be a representative of a party at all. This one we will support against Fidesz, because involvement of civil movement, involvement in civil society in the political process, to put this kind of persons in the position, until now we're only party members in this position. Those who are not party members but are loved and respected by civil society. My last word, I know that is too long, about progress. We spoke about progress. For a long time, people believed that progress is basically following up the progress of science and technology. Science and technology indeed progresses, and the ancient conception was that if science and technology progresses, then human life will also progress, that human society will be better, more just, if more happy than before. That was an illusion, and it is not true. Technological development, internet included, everything included you discussed today in one of the groups, because you told it. I think they are indifferent politically. That is, already Sophocles in ancient times, when he enumerated in Antigone, in the core of Antigone, all the great discoveries of that time, fire included, they said the same can be used for the evil and it can be used for the good. This is true about internet, that's why. It can be used to the good, it can be used to the evil. It depends on how you use it. And who uses it and which is the purpose of the use. Any technology, you said nuclear power can be used to the good and to the evil. Everything can be used to the good and the evil. That basically it's not the question of technological development, question the who decides about the use of this technological possibility. This is what I would answer to the last question. I think I answered all of them, maybe.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Agnes. So we have some space for involving you also. I would ask you to speak from the place. Just push the button, it's easier then. I will take 4 to 5 interventions. It depends also how long you speak. The longer you speak, the less we can take. Who wants to start? Yeah, and also indicate your name, please.
Hi, very good afternoon. My name is Pranav Gupta and I'm from India. My question is to Agnes ma'am. Traditionally, the idea of a dictatorship is that economic rights are provided and social and political rights are not provided. But what we're seeing in Europe is neither economic rights, nor social rights, nor political rights are being provided. So how does this dichotomy place the dictator in terms of the subjects who are voting for them? I mean, why are they doing this? Thanks.
Next. Who wants? Yeah.
So, I don't have a question, I have an answer though. Amin asked the question, what should social democracy look like in the 21st century? And I think we can even look to the 19th century for some of the answers. As far as I understand it, and I'm not educated in politics, as far as I understand it, social democracy has as its goal or idea of balancing positive rights, right? There are various rights, positive rights, that are mutually exclusive or can interact with each other. For example, the right to do with one's property as one wishes against the rights of, for example, the environment or labor. And there are also other positive rights, such as free speech, that balance with the right to other free speech even, and the right to not have your communities be slandered, disparaged, and hurt. So I think that in the 21st century, coming back, that a lot of these rights have a lot of the sliders on the scales have moved to, for example, the rights of property and the rights of commerce, and that in order to balance the scales, again, we need to add weight on one side. To balance the scales, I think we need radical solutions, and that I think radicalism and social democracy can coexist, and in fact I think need to coexist. So what do you think about radicalism and more socialist even policies trying to bring back the balance that really is the strength of social democracy? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Je vais m'exprimer en français.
I shall speak in French. There is interpretation. Interpretation is available.
Je m'appelle Ilir, je viens...
I come from Kosovo. My name's Ilya. I don't want to start a debate, but I'd like to ask a question. What differentiates the European Union today from the United States, China, and other countries in Europe? It's the issue of human rights. Human rights are vital, and this is our difference to the other countries in the world. The European Union is the only area which protects human rights properly through the European Courts in Human Rights in Strasbourg. I think that we as social democrats, we need to focus on human rights. How can we do this when you've got 26 people with the same wealth of 3.8 billion people? 26 people have the same wealth of the half of humanity. This is something we need to combat. The thing which appalls me even more is income inequality between men and women. The fact that women earn 25% less than men for the same work. This is something which we as social democrats must combat. We also need to found our work on citizens' rights. In Europe, we need to put citizens' rights at the heart of what political groups and what civil society should do. I have some proposals how we might approach this. We can see employment dropping, we can see jobs disappearing. We need to tax machines, a taxation on machines. That would be my proposal. Tax evasion, 100 billion euros of tax is not paid in Europe. If we had this money and invested it in environment, in redistribution, in universal income, this is something which is very close to my heart as a socialist, that every individual should have enough money to cover their needs, to choose their job, to be able to determine their lives. I think this is vital. I think we need to focus on human beings.
I will take the lady first. We had already 4 men speaking.
Hi. I also have a question and a statement. My statement pertains to Europe's relationship with Africa and the Global South in general. I think that we, as progressives, we need to show more solidarity to the Global South. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is through the trade deals that Europe makes with countries in the Global South that are often asymmetric and contribute to sort of diminishing economic growth in those regions. And I think that we can't, sorry, I don't know what your name was, but as he was saying, it's absolutely criminal, the inequality between the global north and the global south. And I think we need to foreground that conversation as progressives, because solidarity needs to be beyond borders. And my question to Jan, actually, you mentioned that a big consequence of, or rather a cause of the situation that we find ourselves in is a failure of the liberal order over the past, say, 30 years. And I think certainly in Europe, with the Blair government, in Britain, sorry, with the Blair government, it was neoliberalism light. And I think for progressive parties in particular, especially in the UK, having the conversation that we need to invest more in social welfare and austerity isn't the way forward, the public just isn't buying that. And I think, how can we seem, I guess, legitimate in the eyes of the demos, of the people who are making these decisions, if by even just making these arguments, it's not something that's really politically palatable at the moment? How do we get past that impasse? I guess that's my question.
Good. Very good. I have 2 more, and then I will close the speakers list. Yeah, you and you.
Here, is this working? Okay. Yeah, so I wanted to touch on some of the many great points that were raised. First, one of the speakers, I think we should actually point out the many hypocrisies in the opposing fractions of the European Parliament, even though that can be seen as a dirty way of campaigning, if you will. But I think it is a strategy that we must employ to be more vocal and to be more heard. And also, I think the point raised about a basic income was very important, because that is the only way that actually we talked about, or you talked about inventions being either used for good or bad, and with the internet and automation being increasingly possible, a basic income and taxes on automation are the only possible way, at least in my point of view, how automation can be a force for good and a force for a more socially just world order. And but I think in order to cancel out hypocrisies with this, we also need to take into consideration what you said about involving the global south, because there's so many neo-colonial structures exporting the milk powder or the Dutch tomatoes to West Africa and destroying local markets is only one example for this. And we have to really not only work within Europe, but also with the global south and show more solidarity to that. Yeah, and I just wanted to make the appeal for being very vocal about all these issues that were just raised. Thank you.
This one? Yeah. Hi, my name is Mario. I'm from Spain. And I have a two-pronged question about how liberal democracies can deal with external illiberal forces. I'm thinking specifically of threats like Russian interference in our elections, in our societies. And B, I'm thinking of our relationships with countries and regions that are not liberal, but from which we can benefit from having positive relationships with. And I'm thinking specifically of the Gulf, maybe where I've lived for many years, or several other countries that are still transitioning towards more liberal models.
You? So I think we have many questions now to be answered. Jan, you want to start again?
Look, I fully agree with the argument, I think, of our Czech colleague that we have to rebalance things. There was certainly too much emphasis on freedom and too little on equality in recent years. There was too much emphasis and benefits for the private sector and too little for the public sector. But, and we can continue, but the things I want to say is that this rebalancing will not just happen because of intellectual proposition. There are vested interests behind those imbalances. There is a lot of money, pride, and glory involved. And history doesn't move just because of preaching. There is a political struggle. And we have to, in democracy, we have to simply convince the electorate that, that our vision of progress and democracy is the one which works for them, because without this, we will just be talking to each other and convince already people who share the same view. It would be echo chamber, another echo chamber. Look, with geopolitical things, it's a tricky, the most tricky issue is that so-called a leader of the free world, the United States of America, has administration which I'm not sure we can call liberal. And this defines many other things. As we speak, President of China is visiting Europe, Italy, and France, and and I just bought a highway, telephone, and I read newspapers. Maybe somebody will is it secure? If I listen to Trump administration, it's not. I don't have any secrets except family secrets, and I'm being spied by the Facebook, too. But then through Facebook, I can spy on my family and colleagues and so on. These are the things which are becoming more and more complicated and mixed with interests and values. By the way, the reasons I've got it is not because moving from Nokia, which I had before, to highways, like changing from a little Fiat to the SUV BMW. It is also because the firm team, you know, which is with the stake ownership involved, offered me practically for free. So why I'm saying those things? Because I'm trying to show you how much those things are interconnected today. That in the one hand, some big decisions affect not only political career of politician X or revenues of this and other companies. It involves our daily life and our basic choices we make. So there are no simple answers to those things, but politics is about making, you know, kind of translating complex issues to simple decisions. We constantly use simple devices to address complex problems. You know, take inequality. We use inheritance tax. We use minimum wage. These are simple solutions for very complex problems. But obviously, at the end of the day, there is a trend which has to be reversed because things went beyond anything acceptable for ordinary voters. And it concerns all issues, including our relationship with the external world. And particularly, I agree with yesterday's comment that our migration policies were not just morally bankrupt, but also utterly ineffective. And what we do today is to repeat exactly the same mistakes we have done in the past. But the story about democracy is that it is somehow selfish, because democracy so far applies to a certain territory and to a certain community. And they largely think about themselves. And they can be generous to others. By others, I don't only mean, you know, for instance, Middle East, North Africa, which was in the questions, but also within the European Union. You know, politicians are elected to serve their constituencies. And unless we square this relationship between territory, authority, identity, and rights, you know, we will never move forward. And this sounds very abstract, but this is the challenge we have in the 21st century. And here I end. Technology is indeed neutral, but democracy changed with technology. Democracy was different in ancient Athens, and then it was different, you know, when the papyrus was invented, and the mass press, and then television, now the internet. So democracy adjusts to those changes, because all of those technological advances, for instance, blown out the distinction between those inside and outside of the community. So the relationship, the space, the notions of space is different. So if the notions of space is different because of the internet, the democracy somehow has to adjust to this too. So it's not like this that anybody just can drive the car. It depends whether the person is from the right or wing or left camp. No, we have to reinvent our tools to deal with each other for the benefit of the individual, which is here at stake. You know.
Agnes?
The question was raised about rights. Someone raised the question, a very important question, and I think only one person spoke about this. In democracy, rights play an essential role. Now, you referred also to the distinction that there are rights which rights can be described, I can do if I will, and the other kind of rights, I can have it if I am. That is, I can participate in a demonstration. If I decide to go to this demonstration, I can go to the polls if I decide to go to the polls. But I am entitled to hospitalization if I am ill, and I am entitled to education if I am a child or a young adult. And there are two different types of right. And the question is, which kind of right go together with obligation? Because normally was the idea that all rights get together with obligation. Is that true? All rights are together with obligation? Or are there rights which don't go with obligation? Or are there obligations without rights? For example, what is the right of children? Is a right. But do our great-grandchildren have a right, can claim a right? We should do something in order that they 200 years from now should live better. I think we have an obligation to the future, but the future has no rights against us because they cannot express their rights, their will, that they should want this or that. So we have an obligation to the future generation, without having they having a right from us that they should have this obligation. So I think these both rights are very important. I speak about the second right because liberal democracy, liberties are normally formally granted. But how these liberties can be used has to do with the second. Because in order to decide in political matters, you need a well-informed public. And what does it mean, a well-informed public? There should be the means of informing the public, should be a means of objectively informing the public, that the public should be able to choose between A or B or A and non-A because he or she or someone in the public is well-informed. This is, for example, a new problem now. There is very little well-informed public. One of the reasons of a great victory of ethnic nationalism in one or the other countries that the public is not well informed because ideology has all the channels of information and others have very little challenge of channels for information. So how can we have a well-informed public? The future of democracy is depending also on it. Can we have a well-informed public? Because a public discusses, doesn't only decide. Before we decide, we have to discuss. We need to know what is right or wrong. So before we decide, we need to know what to decide. And if that not what to decide, we need to know what about we need to decide. And it's extremely important for the future of democracy. It's up to you to find out how can we have well-informed future in the whether internet makes us better informed as we used to be, whether the disappearance or the not necessarily disappearance or the problematic character of printed press nowadays. Printed press used to be half a century of quite objective information. I think nowadays it's not more the case. So I think this is one important thing. And finally, that's the final. Everything depends on education. Today, everything depends on education. Upwards mobility depends on education. The ability to decide in matters importance is also decided by education. Not the form of education, but the content of education plays also here role. Not only how many classes, who teaches you, what are you taught, whether you have a choice of the books from which you learn, whether you have a choice not paying more in another school, but the same free education in different quality of schools, in different places. Whether you have the possibility, I think almost most things depends on it. I don't speak about other rights because time went on. We have no time anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. So, thank you so much. We are coming to an end of this session. I just want to ask you if someone wants to make very short comment, and then I will ask both of you in one sentence, how do you see our democracy in 10 years' time? Yeah? But first, if someone wants to make a very short comment, you are invited. So that's not the case for the moment. Jan, in 10 years' time, our democracy.
Look,
sorry. You want it? No.
In 1 year time, I don't see it very rosy. but in 10 years, I'm pretty optimistic. Particularly in Europe, but I would say also in our immediate neighborhood, I see people who want to have real voice and who are generally attached to freedom. I actually don't believe that the electorate is stupid. I believe that the electorate had good reasons to abandon us, and we have to do our best to regain their trust. Because, you know, I don't see the electorate anywhere being just totally misled or irrational. They know very well that politicians, you know, they sell them political product. But it doesn't mean they are being fooled by this. But it might be too optimistic.
Thank you. Agnes, 10 years' time.
Democracy in 2 years, 10 years' time. I have to say democracy is totally unnatural political institution. For many, many thousand years, always one single man ruled each and every place, each and every country. It's a very new institution. Looking at the human history is new, and we have to still try it out, how it works. We are in the period of trying it out. How it would look like in 20 or 10 years from now depends how we try it out nowadays, because it depends on you. It is not kind of institution which is traditional. It is untraditional, because it's not traditional, depends on the people who are here, who are there, how they keep with this new form, how they keep it alive. And so I cannot say anything about the future. Even a philosopher know from Aristotle that you cannot say about the future either true or false statements. So I do not want to give you either true or false statement. I can speak about my hopes and about my fears. The hopes are that you deal with this question well, and you will make sense of democracy, this new political arrangement, that it should work not just for 10 years from now, but maybe 50 years from now as well. And I'm afraid that it won't do, but it depends on you anyway.
Thank you very much. So, thank you for taking part in this discussion. Agnes was using the example of the sunflower. So social democracy could become a sunflower movement if the sun is strong, and all together we are the sun. So let's make social democracy a sunflower movement. Thank you.
Yalla.
Jetzt? No, now is lunch, right? Ja, Mittagessen. Und wann geht's weiter? 13:30 Uhr? Eine Stunde später. 14:30 Uhr. Ich habe noch immer gelesen, Zeit. All right. Molto bene.